It echoes in an empty room. I'd like to call the meeting to order, please. Roll call of attendance.
Done.
Approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor of the agenda as presented, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Discussion information items, using Chromebooks to view the board packets and board book. Dr. Larson, you want to take lead?
Yeah, I'd like to take the lead by turning it over to Patrick.
That's great.
Great. So a couple of meetings ago, I noticed all of you, you're going through policy and you're flipping through a lot of papers trying to find the information that you needed. In the back room, as part of our one of our professional development tools, we do trainings in here. We have a cart of Chromebooks. So we thought it'd be a good idea to bring the Chromebooks out, give you all that information so it's right in front of you. So if you do have to go through and find different information, it's a little bit easier for you to go through and do a search and find. So that's why you have Chromebooks in front of you tonight. And I just want to walk you through a couple of things, just to so you understand how we have it set up. So if you open up the Chromebook, they're already powered on. So when you open it up, you give it about 5 seconds, the Chromebook will start up and will bring you to a login screen. You are going to need to know your district email address and your district password. If you don't have that tonight, I have a guest login that you can log into. But when you log into the Chromebook, it's going to bring you to a page that you see up on the screen. And a couple of things I want you to notice, just to make this as easy as possible for you during the meeting. There's 2 tabs that are going to open up automatically. One of them goes to Board Book, and if you click that, here is the meeting agenda for this evening, the agenda packet, everything that you need. When you open one of these up, down at the bottom there's a plus and a minus, so you can zoom in if you need to. And if you look up at the top, it opened up a separate tab for you. So when you're done with this, you can just click the X and close that tab, and you're still at in Board Book. The other tab that opens automatically is a Google Shared folder. And what I'm going to do is for each meeting, I'll drop the presentations that we were having that night in this. Now you still have the presentation up here. You'll still watch the presentation the way you did. Sometimes when the presentation gets done and you're having discussion afterwards, you like to be able to go back and look at some of the information. So you can come to this tab, this file, and you'll have the presentation. Here's the budget presentation for tonight. Again, down at the bottom, there's a plus sign, so you can zoom in if you need, a minus if you want to zoom out. In the event that you close one of these accidentally, I'm also going to send you an email right before the meeting starts. And that email address is going to, or that email that comes in, let's see if I sent it. Oh, I didn't include this user. But you're going to have an email, you'll have an email in your email account that's going to have 2 links for you. One that goes to Board Book and one that goes to that presentation. So just in case you close out, you don't have to worry about getting that information. One other tip for you, if you are looking at just a regular screen and you want it to get bigger, if you hold on Control and hit the plus, that's going to zoom in the whole page. That's just a Chrome trick that you can use. Control minus makes it a little bit smaller. So what we're hoping to do is make this a little bit easier for you to go through and see the information that you need. If you've got, let's see, just click Advanced. Which will light came up for you, I'll check that out. And there's a link at the bottom of Google.
Thank you.
Yep. So let's try this out. As you go through, if you have some questions, some things that you're running into, I'll chat with you and we'll see what we can do to make this work a little bit better. But hopefully this makes things a lot more efficient for you as you move through your meetings.
This is great.
Yeah? Any questions? Yes?
When we're at home reviewing our board packet days before the meeting, will we still, traditionally I go through, log on the Board Book, find the appropriate meeting date and open it and download it into my computer at home. But the presentation pieces, sometimes those are available before our meetings as well, and so the question I have is, where would I find those at home?
Sure, and let me talk to Laura about that and how she wants to do that, but I can make that available in that same folder if she wants to go that route. And I'll see what thoughts she has about
Okay.
that.
All right.
And Laura can let you know where
I
they
mean, it could be as easy as when we get the invite from Laura to view the board book.
Sure.
That presentation would just be a slide. So,
Yep, we can absolutely do that. Okay, any other questions?
this is very cool. Thank you.
Good. Great.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you. 4B, school start time. Dr. Larson?
Thank you. Madam Chair and members of the board, we've had numerous conversations about school start time. It's been brought up way back from AMSD in August of 2016 to board meetings. We added another study session, and we've to talk about it again as well. The goal that we were going to have was that we were going to try to act on December 14th. One of the issues that we spent a lot of time on, thank you, sorry about that, thank you. One issue we spent a lot of time on, and I'll defer to Bill Manazzi in just a minute on this, is about transportation. And part of the issue, I think, with creativity is not thinking outside the box as much as sometimes having to think within the box. We have some constraints that we have to work with and live with. Some are budgetary constraints, some are just time of day constraints. Anyway, we have things that we must do and we have to be able to live with. One of the things that we have to live with is the fact that in our contract, we have 610 minutes of student contact time, 310 minutes of student contact time per day for teachers. And so it's difficult to change the amount of time on the school day. The second thing is that we have legal requirements about how much school is required for each of the students per grade level. Kindergarten's 155 hours over, so we're in good shape there. But the secondary schools, or secondary 7 through 12, is 12 hours over the minimum. If you remember last year, we talked at a calendar meeting about what we could do in terms of some more professional development and trying to squeeze some time during the day. When you're only 12 hours over the minimum, it's really difficult to do that. However, if you were to add 10 minutes the second day, you'd be able to create a buffer of 40 hours that could possibly provide staff development time. So looking at school start times and staff development times and the calendar altogether brings us those three pieces. However, some other constraints that we've talked about include finances. And I want to spend a little bit of time on this, but I also want to talk to Bill because one of the questions that we wanted to discuss was about if we went with vans and how many students we're talking about and those sorts of things. But from CISO, the Central Minnesota and the Center for Efficient School Operations, we do have 18 routes of which we transport 2,359 students K-12 for daily transport. The routes are K-5, average capacity of 64 students, and our 612 buses are average capacity of 77. And so they've given us information about the drop time and all of those things. I've also asked them to look at some other scenarios and options about if we looked at school start times, changing them, and what would be the cost factor on it. One of the things that we have in terms of more detail now is from Bill Manazzi, business manager, who was in conversation with Harlan Hedvig, is that how we pronounce his name? Okay. At any rate, there's some other financial pieces that if you could share what we've discovered today.
Like Dr. Larson said, just in an effort to make sure we're operating efficiently and we continue to look at transportation in our process and our contract with Minnesota Central. Transportation is a large part of our expenditure budget, and so we'd be remiss if we didn't look at that and try to find efficiencies in the contract. I talked to our transportation company today on two specific items. One, we're revisiting the issue or the idea of using 7 passenger vans, 5 students, in lieu of school buses in our sparsely populated areas of our school district boundary. When we look at that, if we were to structure our routing, the 18 regular routes that Dr. Larson talked about, and substituted vans for buses, vans are cheaper in the contract, between $80 to $100 cheaper per van per day. However, the number of vans that we would need to reduce our routes from 17 to 18, we would need 2 to 4 vans to do that. Now, although a van is $80 to $100 cheaper per day, if you have, let's call it 3 vans, that's going to cost us at least $20 more like $40,000 to $60,000 more per year to transport those students in our sparsely populated areas with vans in lieu of buses. So we did look at that as a good idea. It just is cost prohibitive, and as you're going to hear later tonight, it's difficult to have starter items when there's a cost tied to it. So we'll continue to talk about that and analyze that, you know, in terms of our routing, but that was kind of our summary on the vans in lieu of buses as it stands right now. The other area that came up, it's important that we have a thorough understanding of state statute with regard to providing transportation to our students. So right now, state statute says that if a student lives in excess of 2 miles from the school that they attend, we're required to provide transportation for that student. Now, it's just not feasible in the state of Minnesota in January to not provide transportation to students within 2 miles, or most districts feel that way. However, some districts have looked at the idea of within X boundary from your school, charging for that service. So if a student lives just across the street and they want to ride the school bus, the idea of charging for that service if they live within that 2 mile radius. The difficult thing for us on that, not impossible to overcome, but certainly a difficulty, is looking at the hazardous streets that we have in our district boundary. Certainly Stillwater Road would be a hazardous street for students to cross to get to school. And we'd have to have a conversation about Warner Road. I think as it currently exists without sidewalks in place, that would be a challenge that we would need to address as well. So an opportunity there to maybe have a conversation and maybe a long view on looking at how we can kind of structure our sidewalks and streets so that we can look at our transportation process. But kind of just a couple of areas: one, the vans in lieu of buses, and then secondly, looking at what is in state statute for transportation. So hopefully that provides a little context.
Additionally, and this is a repeat from before, we had looked at and asked for information about what would happen if we switched bus times. A flip of times would not add any additional cost. However, one bus tier would be cost prohibitive. Flipping the secondary and elementary and adding time to the secondary school day would add approximately $145,000. That would move our contract, under current contract terms, a base annual cost projection for this system is approximately $1,146,000, or about $145,000 additional cost for our current system. Additional costs associated with this scenario could be reduced through renegotiation of the current transportation contract terms. What that means is that although there is that cost, it's possible to be renegotiating that down if you add another year of service. So instead of committing to them for 2 years or 3 years, we add a year and then that price gets knocked down. So that is, it's a solid number from CISO, but it is something that is negotiable. So as I start out with, part of the issues of thinking inside the box and some of the constraints that we have, and combining the calendar, professional development, and school start times are all centered around trying to figure out the best way to do this if we believe in the research. And I, for one, do believe that the research is compelling and it's clear that adolescents need more sleep than they're getting. And one of the ways to do that is to have later starts for students. Now, that does come with other costs in terms of just conveniences to families and other issues in mind. But by and large, there have been 26 different studies that have been cited that are on the website about the need for adolescents to get more sleep. Both related to researchers related this to both later starts and earlier starts. The evidence was conclusive that later starts benefit adolescents. The same study, though, concludes with our findings indicate that early start times may be just as detrimental for young children as they are for adolescents. And I shared this at the last meeting as well. So we're looking at the constraints that we have in terms of calendar, in terms of transportation costs, in terms of busing, in terms of staff development, and in terms of all the time. And my conclusion is that the only way that we could make a viable option for changing school start times would be to do a flip. And that would basically mean that the elementaries would start later and the secondaries would start earlier. You have, on September 22nd, we went over this at a board meeting. Bill provided this information to me, and we looked at it.
You said the secondaries would start earlier.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I misspoke.
Later.
Yes, later. I'm sorry.
And
Yeah.
then elementary would start earlier. Right.
Yes, yeah, I'm sorry, yeah, thank you. The flip, though, would accomplish that. The scenario one flip, if we started the secondary at 9 o'clock and ended at 3:40, that'd be a 6-hour and 40-minute school day. It would achieve the later start time for secondary students in accordance with sleep study. It would give us more time for professional development, and there would be no cost or very little cost if we renegotiate the contract in terms of having the current busing, contract, and routing parameters that we currently have. The negatives, though, is that the school start ending time for secondaries would be at 3:40. Activities, students getting out early for school for activities would all be that, and the daylight issues for outdoor fall sports with delayed start times. O.H. Anderson start time would be at 7:45 and Wildwood at 7:55 under this scenario, with some students being picked up before 6 o'clock, at about 6:45 and 6:55 for some students. And their school day would end at 2:05 and 2:15 respectively. It's difficult to extend the elementary school day because of the contract. That's the 310 minutes of student contact time. So that parameter hamstrings us a little bit. Secondary doesn't have that as an issue, but you can't add time to the secondary day if the secondary starts first. And the reason why that is that you need, if the secondary starts currently at 8 o'clock and the elementary start at 9:05 and 9:15, that doesn't make any difference on that run. But if you extend the secondary day to, say, 2:40 instead of 2:30, then you can't get back in time to pick up the elementary students. And we're cutting it close anyway. So you need to be able to get back in time, otherwise we violate the contract in the 310 minutes of student contact time. So those things hamstring us in that sense as well. Finally, the other piece that I do want to speak to a little bit is that we do have 12 hours of contract time or of potential time to use for staff development. However, snow days or cold days or issues like that would mean that we'd bring students back in, and then we would also be forced to either bring students back in and give up staff development, or we would have to extend the school year a little bit longer for students. One of the key things that we've heard from the community is about the inconvenience of a change, and part of that issue is that all of a sudden now, instead of the, I can't remember what the day is exactly in the spring of the year for conferences, that becomes staff development, that becomes a student contact day. People have made plans, vacations, that sort of thing, and all of a sudden they have to come back into school. And so that's an issue that I think that if we want to consider late starts or early releases for staff development, that's going to be really difficult when we're looking at just where we are in terms of time. The second scenario that we looked at was going with 8:45, and we run into some of the same kind of issues there, except that now the students get picked up even earlier, and they're dismissed even earlier. And because of that, it seems that the conversation was about starting even at 8:30 would mean, basically would be something of a non-starter for people, because O.H. Anderson students would be getting picked up about 6:30 or 6:35, and they would end at 1:55. So the issue there becomes one that it's really difficult in order to have students get on the bus that early and get released from school that early. Finally, we also talked about compressing the time, about adding buses. And that would mean that it would achieve some of the goals we wanted. 8:30 seemed to be the time that people liked the most, but the issue largely was going to be one in which, if we did that, we'd have to add about $330,000, and elementary students would still be picked up as early as 6:25 a.m. So that's where we were in terms of trying to think, look at things creatively. We examined looking at vans instead of buses as a cost factor. We looked at compression to see what we could do. We looked at staff development. And we've looked at the calendar, and we are in a spot where it's very difficult to have anything except the straight terms flip in terms of school start times. And there's inherent difficulties and pluses with both of those. And so at this time, the recommendation that I had made earlier on was to have the school start at 9 a.m. for the secondaries and 7:45 and 7:55 for O.H. Anderson and Wildwood. However, that's coming with a lot of difficulty, and we're hearing a lot from the community. That's what I've said before. I'm curious as to what the board is interested. I didn't go into any of the detail that we had about MAC and any of the secondary. Some of that is speculative. So, for example, if the secondary now is getting out at 3:40, what about Nordic skiing? I don't know exactly what would happen with that. We can get a good estimation because they wouldn't be able to practice as long and all that sort of thing. So I'm wondering if there's other questions or other thoughts that we'd like to have before I come to a formal recommendation on the 14th.
Questions from board members?
Seems so many moving parts. No question right now.
So one of the things that the board has asked for, I think, to come out for this meeting as well is the other easy fixes that we could do that were sort of transitional. There was a list from last January that the board had asked to be implemented. There were things we would present in charge of Mark that could be done to allow LMC to have more sleep. We call them the low-hanging fruit, which I still don't like, as a term for those things. And you were going to look into those to see where we were with each of those items. You saw that list?
Yep.
Can we get an update on
Yes,
those items?
we've eliminated 0 hour, so we do not have any 0 hour classes. We have not been able to avoid core curriculum and AP classes first hour. We will have to have some of those classes, well, throughout the school day. In a 6-period day, there will be AP classes, first hour, second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth. And same thing with CIS classes. And so that is something that we want to avoid, but simply logistically, we cannot. Make electronic homework submission deadlines earlier in the evening. Had a really pleasant conversation with the union president not too long ago, and it's something that we can do. I think it needs to be mandated by the superintendent in order to do that at the secondary levels, and I think that could happen. End of official school activities, practices, no later than 10 hours before the bus pickup the next day. We can do practices, but we can't do games. For example, if the game goes into overtime, it goes into overtime. We do include sleep education in the health class. That was another item. We are also looking at having the counselors assess for sleep deprivation when counseling students about behavioral issues. We had not been doing that historically. Those are the things that we've looked at. What I would suggest is that we do a couple of things. One is that the superintendent gives a dictate to the staff saying that starting at this point, second semester, no electronic submissions before after 10 p.m. That could help a little bit than that. And then for next year, we've already put things into place. For example, we'll have some activities before school. Jazz band will meet from time to time. We had the blue and gold recognition thing 2 weeks ago. We've had Student Leadership Council meet before school. We'd have to either move those to lunch and learn time or after school time, and just say we're not doing anything before school on those type of things. Secondary, both elementary would not be part of that, but that would be at the secondary. And so in terms of the practices, we would just have to make that as part of the dictate that there's no, like for example, if you are having a sports practice and you need to get your students picked up, currently they'll get picked up around 7 a.m., then you have to end it by 9 p.m. Games might be different, especially if they're traveling, but we can do that with practices. But those have to be dictates from the superintendent or the school board.
Another thing we had on the list was avoiding meeting on finals. Was when we added in competition.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Would that be another thing that would be mandated from the superintendent, or do you thinking?
Yes, it can be, or the school board.
If it's from the school board, what else do we need to do beyond the discussions?
Well, direct the superintendent to tell them to not do it. The school board has more weight than the superintendent.
But I feel like we've been saying it, so do we need to say it more formally, or? Because I thought we had said we wanted the 10 p.m. deadline back in January, so I just wanted to know, what am I missing?
Well, it hadn't been.
What else do we need to do to make it
Right,
happen?
well, it hadn't been my practice to micromanage what time teachers have assignments turned in. Some get their assignments, they'll take them up till 8 a.m. that morning of. And some will, not everybody does it electronically, it's not like 100%. And so, but we can do that if that's something that we think is really important. But that could be part of a picture. The other piece, though, is, let's finish this piece first before I go back to what I wanted to say. But I can do that either through memo form or else through the principals.
Go ahead.
On the electronic submission of a homework time period, that started several years ago when I talked to the Sleep Society folks, and Chase Anderson and the woman from the University of Minnesota, Kyla Wallstrom, thank you. And they had not thought of that idea, and they liked my idea. It was very informal, and I believe they've adopted that in the toolkit, if I'm right. So, to me, if we're believing of what they're talking about is trying to get quality sleep hygiene, I believe is the term, that we could pretty easily slip into that, getting that one done. I mean, they've recommended it as being good. So, I would say we could move on that one expeditiously.
Google Docs, it's all individually set up, so.
Yeah.
It's easier to-
Yeah.
Oh, so, but you were, that was 10 p.m. cutoff? Is that what you're talking about? The sleep thing that you said?
Well, I mean, that was, it was just an idea. As I'm
Yeah.
hearing all this information, I thought, well, there is this thing where, between the days, you would have till 11:59.
Right.
Typically before it rolls over to the next
Right,
day.
right.
And this would be a way of not, I mean, I'm guilty of it too. Just in time, you do the thing right
Yeah.
to the end. I am totally guilty. And so this would be a way of relieving them of that, having to do it to the very end. They could do it by 10. So.
Yeah, that makes sense. Would it be possible for us to, should we write something up, or as a order?
We already did
Yeah.
last year in January.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll just read it. While research is being carried out, we should examine current practices to determine if there are things we can do to help students get the sleep they require. Among the ideas from Minnesota Sleep and Society include these things. And we added no 8 a.m. finals.
So did we say do this, or this is something to look at?
It says, well, research is being carried out. And, but I believe that people think that, yeah, we had to do it, and I didn't.
Okay, so let's do it, I guess. I mean,
I think there needs to be some clarification, because I'm confused on the eliminate 0 hour, because you said we eliminated 0 hour classes, but this says 0 hour, and I thought that included everything. So when we say eliminate 0 hour, what do we mean? Do we mean everything before the start of the school day, or do we mean classes? I don't think that's clear.
can somebody please explain to me exactly what 0 hour is?
It's before the school day starts.
Okay.
So first-
Class, for example, they start at 7:15 a.m.
So anything before 8 is 0 hour?
Yeah.
Okay.
That was something.
So, but these were things, remember, we had said as sort of a transition year, right? We did the studies and we looked at this, things that would move us in the right direction.
Mhm.
So,
Because there's still drama before school. Is there choir before school as well?
I'm not sure.
I don't know.
I don't know.
There are small groups from time to time.
Yeah. I don't know.
I don't know what's before school.
Yeah.
Should we investigate the 0 hour piece or the?
Well, it sounds like you have, Mark. I mean. you said-
I don't know if the jazz band, I know there's some things that happen from time to time.
Right. But I think having something from time to time, why is not ideal? Again, it might go to limitations. There is no other time for it, and if it's not a regular thing compared to a 0 hour course, which is every single day, I think they're different. In terms of, if you think about sleep hygiene, I mean, occasionally you're not going to get a good night's rest for whatever reason, and if it's an occasional thing like that, one practice before a show, or then I guess compared to when it's regular, it's every day or 2 or 3 times a week, I think impacts sleep differently.
Agreed. The blue and gold recognition, some of you have been to that, is a very nice thing. They've tried it at different times. The only time they can seem to get parents in is at 7 a.m., and so that happens 3 times a year.
Right.
And so, to me, that's not something, that's not a 0 hour thing. The fact that opening night is on Friday and we're just not quite ready, that seems to me to be kind of an emergency type thing. I know that the play is not the purpose of our schooling, it's more in terms of the academics, and I understand the sleep piece of it, but I understand that there would be exceptions too.
So I'm just thinking about the 10 p.m. submission deadline. I'm not sure. I'm not sold that that's the best, especially the parent of someone who was a swimmer, because my daughter never got home from swimming until 10 o'clock. So that would mean it would have I'm just saying that could be an unintended consequence. I don't know that 10 o'clock is the best time. I don't know, I don't know when, I never pay attention when my kids are submitting stuff, so I really don't know. But I'm saying 10 o'clock would harm swimmers, and it would likely harm hockey players, and it would so
We keep
I-
Talking about the line between school board, school, and parents. I mean, part of that is a parenting role. If your child is allowed to stay up to midnight to finish an assignment, again, it might be a once in a while kind of thing that you just say yes because of swimming. I don't think it's an every night thing. I would hope, there's not an assignment due every night, and, I don't want to micromanage teachers or buildings or the superintendent. And I don't know if we have enough evidence for that one. I hear what Kevin's saying, that, if the time is earlier, but is that our call? Or should it be our call?
I mean, again, I think if we're trying to give wellness to our students,
Mm-hmm.
it certainly would be a place to start.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, again, it's just in time.
Mhm.
Get it in, and I understand the dilemma of some of the sports, but then are the assignments such that you get them one day and they're due the next? Or do you get an assignment that might have 3 or 4 days attached to it, so that you could?
Mhm.
They all do it at the last minute.
That's exactly right.
Well, a lot of them do. A lot of them do it at the last minute, so I'm just saying.
Yeah.
I don't know if 10 o'clock is the right time. I'm just saying,
Well, maybe we, again,
I'm not
maybe we
sure
need to
that's
find out,
the answer to the problem.
maybe we need to find out more from our staff, our professionals that are doing this.
That would be good input.
But it would be worth investigating.
Yeah, to ask the
If-
staff how many kids are turning in, an average time when they're turning it in. Is it at midnight? Is it at 9, 8? I mean, is there a general time where most kids are coming in,
I do think that it would be a good direction to move, in the sense, if you have a 10 o'clock deadline, then the teachers would have to plan ahead and say, okay, we'll probably have to give a couple of days' notice, which again is good for lowering anxiety and stress, all things we're working toward. It then teaches that student, ooh, I'm going to be gone until 10, so I'm going to have to turn it in the night before. I know they wait till the last minute, but if we are here to set some policies that help move towards wellness, and even if it's just a little sliver where we have an impact, which it is, we all know that parents have the greatest impact. But if we're going to have to take any steps at all, I think we need to make some choices. And if teachers come back and say, it didn't work, or we're certainly open, we listen all the time to our teachers. We're doing this to help them and to help the culture in our community. So I just think it's worth pursuing these things, just so that we are affecting a small change where we can.
In the interest of time, can we go through each of both items, make sure we're very clear with Dr. Larson what we're expecting, so it's clear, as soon as they can be implemented, it's done. So the 0 hours, the 0 hour courses, which is done, right?
But not activities.
But not regular activities. Is that a good way to phrase it, Dr. Larson? Would that make sense?
Something that happens monthly is regular, something that happens bi-monthly is also regular.
Okay.
Yeah, so
We
I
need a
mean-
term there. Yes, you're right. You're right.
I'm not trying to be difficult, but I mean,
It's
we're-
true.
We're splitting hairs on a lot of these things then.
Right.
The way of understanding it, we meant courses here, and there will be things that happen occasionally, which are fine. Core curriculum AP courses, 6-hour day, that just doesn't work. Homework submission, 10, 11? What are we thinking?
Well, the kids' natural sleep time, they say is 10:45 to 11.
Yeah, is when they would fall asleep,
And then fall asleep.
when the brain is ready to go to sleep, yeah.
Then I think
But-
10:30.
Every possible minute they can have.
Then the brain can shut off.
All right. Official school activities, practices, not games, right? Sleep education's already in the health class. We're working on the counseling piece, is that right?
Yes.
And then the 8 a.m. finals. Now, these things only are true if we keep an 8 o'clock start time.
Right.
If we change the start time, then these things will obviously go away. So are we good on these things? Can we move forward with the?
Let me. I want to be, I think we're
Talking about two things. A lot of these pieces that we're talking about in terms of avoiding core curriculum, or excuse me, make electronic homework submissions, does that matter as much if students are starting school at 9 o'clock? So now instead of irritating a busload of swimmers because they couldn't get their assignment in, they have that extra hour built into their day already. So to me, it's two issues. These are things that if we don't make any changes, the things from January 5th are if we don't make any changes, and then if we do make a change, then a lot of these would go away. I don't see us adding back 0-hour classes. I think we're going to stick with eliminating that.
So, okay. I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on the complexities of this
Right.
part of it. If we could just think about this and think about your recommendation that comes forward, because your recommendation that comes forward next week might have two outcomes. Either we do it this way or we do it this way.
Right.
Does that make sense? And
Yeah.
so let's not split hairs over this tonight until we see what the recommendations are next week.
So the board's looking at two recommendations from you?
Well,
One
not
if we
necessarily, I mean,
change, one if we don't change, or?
the recommendation you've put forward in your documents is a change. But if that motion should fail, then we would implement these things.
Mhm.
Does that make sense? So it's not
Right.
really two recommendations, it's,
Okay.
Or if other information's come to light, or there's been a
Right.
change of opinion
Right.
after, when this was sent out way back in, in August, when we were talking about when I completed the document. That was before we had a lot of the other issues. Okay. So, yes, as you said, in the interest of time, I can do that.
The part of assessing the students on sleep deprivation, is that one of the bullet points?
Yes.
Okay. And that hasn't been done much, you said, not much has been done in this area. And so I think that regardless of what we decide as far as school start times, this is something that we have to incorporate it to, it's part of our wellness, make sure that when the counselors are meeting with the children, and the behavior issues and things like that, somehow try to track that and make sure, find out if they're getting enough sleep or not. And I think that we should look into that and ask those, try to find that out. I mean, if not now, but just over the course of another year or whatever, because that could be important information.
I'd like to put another scenario on the table. I hope it won't be too complicated, or you can shoot it down right away if it runs into some other problems that
I seem to keep finding. I think the board seems to be in agreement with you, Dr. Larson, with the research that we've read, that we know a later start time is better for adolescents. The research for elementary, we know is not clear. We know our
As
community, as clear. We don't know if 9 o'clock is a good start time for elementary students, in fact. I mean, so 9 o'clock might not be. We don't know that. We know that our community has been very vocal, either for a change in start time or against a change in start time. So I believe there's a school in Minneapolis, I'm not sure, I'm thinking it's North, but I might be mistaken on that, that has 2 start times. And so I'm thinking about that. I'm thinking about the virtual academy, which I think we closed a couple years ago for budgetary reasons, which now I'm questioning that decision that we made as being a little short-sighted. I know we added the last minute some online courses this year, too, and so we're moving back in that direction. Is there a way to consider a dual start time at the high school by allowing the families who want the change in start time to have their kids take an online course and have them start second hour somehow? And maybe if they want that, they pay for the busing, because we might need to put another bus in somehow or something if they can't drive yet. But is that a scenario that would be a possibility to look into? Because then the families who have things set, or the kids who have sports or whatever, they would have their concerns met. But the families who are very concerned about the early start time would have the opportunity to have their students start later. Is that something worth exploring? It's,
Yes.
it's complex, I get that.
So the school does that?
In Minneapolis, there's a high school I know that starts 2 different times. Their kids can come for first hour, they can start at second hour. but I can't remember what school it is.
I've not heard of that. And
They've got
I
a
think
flex
the
start time.
transportation becomes a big issue.
Right, it
We're talking
does.
Juniors and seniors, and that might make
That's
things a
not,
little bit easier.
right, but our freshmen, our sophomores do not drive.
Right.
You know, and so that's a piece I have not thought about. Maybe our vans could help out there, because Bill likes to investigate vans. He can send it back for the third time to talk about vans. But that might be an option, you know, because we've been looking for an innovative solution that takes something and does it differently. And there could be huge roadblocks to this. And I feel like, you know, we're in the last hours, but I feel like, you know, parents have been very clear. They've got some concerns about elementary starting late or starting earlier. Some of our high school students and our sixth grade students have talked very clearly about concerns about their sports and activities and different things. But at the same time, we are hearing very strongly also from the people who want the time to flip. So I'm just trying to figure out, is there a way we can accommodate both ways of thinking?
Yeah, possibly. I don't know if I'll have something put together by Monday when the board packet comes out.
Right, right.
And are there other things other board members have thought about that might be innovative and address this a little bit differently that we could think about?
There had been 2 suggestions in emails received, and we had discussed those at the last meeting, and I don't know if those were realistic options.
You want someone to go through them?
I don't remember, I don't have them with me.
You have a Chromebook in front of you with your email.
That's true.
This is very convenient.
But one, if I recall correctly, it had to do with having one morning where it was a later start, and then, is this not ringing a bell with anyone?
Yes, yes.
Okay, all right, I'll find it.
Basically, no, it's basically kind of moving like a lunch and learn thing to 8 o'clock.
First hour.
And so students
Right.
need to come in
Right.
until the end of that time to do that.
But again, I think we're into the same problem with busing, you know, which,
Well, then those kids would have to come in.
right, right. And so, but if you change something, you make it, really you're giving the benefit of extra sleep only to juniors and seniors, you know. Because you also think about our middle school students, they're also adolescents. I mean, how would that fold into this as well? You know, think about that. Is that something we want to look into, or is that too complex? And
I guess my question on your scenario or the 9 a.m. idea, I think a lot of the conversation in the community has been around an 8:30.
right, it could be 8:30, you know.
My only concern about any of this is that we really only have a week to render a decision in the community. I don't think at this point we'll really know the scenarios, which you see what I'm saying, the time is getting nigh here where we're not really having enough time to go through this. I mean, the idea that you've proposed might be a great one, but do we have enough time to really address that before the 14th?
I think there's 2 parts to the question. There's what is the right thing to do for kids? And that's our responsibility. What is the right thing to do for students? And there's the implementation of whatever is decided. And so if you look at St. Paul, remember St. Paul Public Schools has talked about this for 10 years. 6 years,
Yeah.
long time. Mounds View.
But you see, the other piece they have is that 3-tier busing, which
Right.
is the.
But they also pushed their implementation out. So when St. Paul did their resolution a month or 2 ago, they won't start their new system until later. Is that a possibility? Should we be looking at a different timeline for implementation of the ideas to give the district time to, you know, fully explore the concepts, the other alternatives? I mean, this is just an idea I came up with because looking at online courses for my own students, I know other parents have called me and said, I don't care if you switch the start time or not. My child's taking online in the fall first hour. And so I think we're going to see kids starting to do that anyway. We've got a group of parents out there starting that noise in the community. And so if we're going to lose those kids regardless, I'd like to keep them in district because then they've got the continuity of the curriculum with the teachers in our buildings, you know. But so I guess it's not my idea really, it's other parents who are thinking about this of, if the school won't do this, how do I support my child? And there might be other ideas too. I mean, we really haven't explored much beyond looking at one start time for all kids in a building. You know, are there other things like that that we should be thinking about? Do we just need more time? You know?
I did find one of the suggestions, and it
Mhm.
was, you know, there's the lunch and learn program. Could we move that so that some students arrive and have that session in the morning, or could we have an extra hour in the school day so that students take either an 8 o'clock class or a 3:30 class?
That's
Essentially what you're,
school
yeah,
in
that's kind of what you're
Minneapolis
saying.
does, yeah.
So that was one of the ones that I think we'd all read. And then there was one other that I haven't found yet. But again, it's that thinking outside the box. I think we talked about it last time.
Right.
The transportation piece became the stumbling block, if we have to provide it. If we make it voluntary, we'll provide transportation from staying as it is right now, 8 to 2:30. If you want to do something
Mhm.
different, it's up to you. We can do that. There's no added cost to that.
But what about doing a class at 2:30 to 3:30? Would that be a possibility?
Yeah, it's less likely with students in terms of activities and so forth. Anybody who's doing after-school activity would be effectively eliminated. And since at the high school kids vote with their feet in terms of signing up for classes, yeah, it's probably a possibility. You know, maybe a class that every ninth grader takes ninth grade English, but ninth grade's our highest activities, you know, so it's hard. I mean, it becomes more difficult then. Because if you force students to choose between, I don't know this to be true, but I believe it's one of those things. If you force them to choose between taking my English class at the end of the school day or playing my fall sport, I think students will choose the fall sport.
Mhm.
It makes intuitive sense to me. I don't have any data to support that.
So what's the will of the board? Do you want the other scenarios looked into? Do you want to go to recommendation for the next board meeting?
I will say, I think it's, just as a side note, either way, we need to understand the online courses better. So I think we all need to be brought up to speed on how many of our students are using that and how they're using it. And I didn't know the history of a program being eliminated, so that would be very helpful to understand.
Madam Chair, may I speak to that real quickly? This year at the high school, that I'm looking to Lynn for confirmation, there are 30 students taking senior English online.
Right.
That's,
And
that
then
they're not
it's,
leaving, they haven't been.
It was around 32 also for social studies.
I think it's 27, but,
Oh, okay.
but
Close
it's
to
a section of each. And those students had been historically taking a class at Century or something like that. And now they're staying on campus and having an
Did you
online
say
class.
30 or 1/3?
30.
30, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And-
It's just it's one section of each
Okay.
of those classes. And it's part of the registration guide this year, so my expectation is that there'll be more students that will take an online class, since it's going to be something that's offered up front as opposed to afterwards.
And what grade level is that?
It's, juniors and seniors.
Senior English is grade 12, I think.
And some of the social studies, they have the options, because some of the students were taking online classes for some of these courses. Now, we can bring the students back and actually have our teachers working with them with the online program that we have in school. We went with the ones that the majority of the students were leaving for was with the language arts and then the social studies, and that's why we added those two back, to bring them back.
So 9 through 12 on those subjects, but just for the English, it was grade 12.
Not as
Or-
many ninth grade, I would say more of the juniors and seniors, but you could take online classes a ninth grader or a 10th grader. But I don't know the numbers that we would have had. I mean, I could find out exactly what grades they were in, but I'd say it's more juniors and seniors, wouldn't you say that? Yeah.
Any clarification? So the flip, if we were to look at the flip, with the high school starting at 9 o'clock, which I'm not hearing 8:30 anymore, I'm now hearing 9. That comes with an extra cost currently. If we were to implement that, that would cost $146,000 more?
According to,
Shane?
CISO, yeah, of that. But they also, that number, while solid, is also negotiable.
So, would we want to find out what that number is before we make a decision?
A good negotiator would not say to us, okay, yeah, we'll drop the price down if you do these things up front. I want to negotiate. So I
No,
don't know
but I
if
think
we
what
do
you
that,
were saying.
but I would go to you, defer to you, Bill, if you think we could.
Yeah, I can go back to Shane in Minnesota Central. I know at least in our preliminary conversations, contract length and dollar amount are gonna be kind of the terms that we would discuss. So just to give you a framework, but I could certainly go and talk to him.
That in your pre-negotiating state, that you could get that to zero. If you said, hey, we'll give you a couple more years.
I truly don't know, Kevin. I don't know how to answer that.
My biggest stumbling block is money. And I said it before, and I'll say it again. My biggest stumbling block is having, spending money that we can ill afford to spend at this current point in time. So, I'm concerned about anything that does that.
So what we're talking about is scenario one. On my sheet, it doesn't say 146,000. Which, is that the one we're talking about?
Yeah, I think that's what Dr. Larson said.
Okay.
I think that most of the conversation was centering around 8:30 because in one of the Minnesota Sleep Side's sweet spot conversation was 8:30 was you wanted to start at least after 8:30. That was the legislation that was put forward in California. That was the conversation earlier this week at MASA. So maybe that's where the 8:30 number is coming.
Does the 8:30 number come with that same cost?
No, but there's not a financial cost, but there's a different cost in terms of O.H. Anderson would then start at 7:15 a.m. If busing remains the same, and that means students would be getting picked up around 6:15 a.m., which at one point in time, at one board meeting, I think the word unpalatable was used about that, just wait till it gets picked up.
Okay, but, so the 9 o'clock one comes with that added cost, so could be negotiated down. The 8:45 or
And 8:30 or
8:30
8:15.
don't have that.
Right. So then the difference, it's not a financial issue.
For those earlier ones, yeah.
Anything else on this topic?
Just a quick question in regards to the online and the school start time. You're seeing a connection between the two.
What's the question?
I guess I'm just thinking as you're asking for more information in those areas, how are we looking at online classes and school start time in regards to the impact?
So a number of families approached me and said their students will be taking an online first-hour course next year, whether it be here because we offer something or if it's somewhere outside of us. That they will work with the school counselors and their child will have an online first-hour course and their child will come to school at 9 o'clock. And so, right, so they would be able to sleep in, they would do that online work on their own time, and they would come at the later time. So many of the parents who feel very strongly about this in the community, about the school start time being 8:30 or later, have found their own solution. And my fear is that solution will cost us money because they will go outside of us. And then that'll reduce the income. It changes the curriculum because our courses are built, across years. I mean, the English in 9th grade builds into 10th grade, 11th grade, and then you pull them out for a year or two for that course. And I don't think that's good for our curriculum and our students. But the parents are saying, I want my child to sleep. I can see this in my child. They cannot go to sleep before 11 o'clock. I'm dragging them out of bed in the morning. And so they're finding their own solution. And so in thinking about that, in thinking about the school in Minneapolis, I can research and see if I can find it again. You know, could we start with that time? We could keep everything the same. If parents chose that option, maybe they could pay for busing or vans, or, you know, because of the 9th and 10th grade piece and the middle school piece. It still leaves some kids out. Some kids are not ready to do independent work like that. But is that a possibility? And are other ideas like that that we can think about? Because I think we've just been looking at this of, oh, school is like this, and let's shift it, and let's flip it. But we haven't thought about, why is school like this? Does it have to be like this? Are there other ways to make it look different to meet the goals that we have?
No, that was helpful.
Okay.
I wasn't seeing it as them staying home and doing it.
Oh.
I was looking at it, okay, if they're coming in, they're fine. Doing it online, this isn't, so
Yeah.
thank you. That's not-
Yeah, sorry, I probably skipped that part.
I don't know if you skipped it or I just didn't.
Yeah, okay. But, I mean, does that make sense from where you sit in terms of curriculum? And I don't know if it'll work or not. I mean, this is what they're saying, and so if this is what's going to happen to a group of students, and I know we might have capacity, we were able to add 2 online courses this year, you know, is there a potential to do that? You know, juniors and seniors, for the most part, most of the students in those grade bands tend to drive to school. Not all, but many. So they might not need transportation. They might have siblings, you know, those kinds of things for the younger ones. But how do we cover, you know, the transportation piece? So, I mean, the ultimate conversation around a lot of these solutions is the transportation. We know Bill likes to talk to the transportation people. So, and it might not work. But I don't feel like we're looking outside of our usual ideas. And so, I mean, if we need some additional time to think about things outside of our usual ideas, I think it's worth taking the time. And so I struggle with, is this a yes or no kind of thing, or is it, yes, we need to do this, but how do we do this?
And just quickly, in terms of the secondary online courses, they have not been in reaction to school start times.
Right,
but
currently.
Students leaving for post-secondary enrollment options. So
Right.
a completely different reason.
Right.
And I understand the reason that you're saying. That
Right, the parents are telling me now that this is what they're going to do next year, you know.
But I can tell you that we've not looked at it through that. We've looked at it from the right, students leaving, so
Right.
secondary not.
But see, they would be leaving. I mean, if the parents have said, if school start time stays the same, then we've got another scenario where they're leaving. So it's the same underlying
Yes.
piece, yeah. So,
So what we could look at is, could it be an independent online study for the student in the morning, the first hour, and offer it to the catch up? But the difficulty would be is if they couldn't get their own transportation or not.
Right.
So,
but, you know, if there's enough of them and they were to pay for a bus, a van, you know, is that a possibility? But I don't know the cost. I mean, we don't know the number of students. I mean, there are a lot of issues with that, you know. But if we could look at groups and thresholds to say, well, if we get at least, you know, a bus load or something, you know, then we know it would cost each family this amount per child. If it's this many, it'd be, you know what I mean, to get some of those ballpark figures would help us understand the possibilities of implementation. This is not a magic thing necessarily. It could crash and burn very quickly.
And the course doesn't have to be offered at 8. It could be a 2:30 or 3 o'clock class too, couldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, so that would be another option, but I hear what Mark is saying about the activities, that so many of our high schoolers and middle schoolers are involved in after-school activities that causes a lot of difficulties there, and then you're forcing students to pick, should I sleep or should I do my activity? And then I think we're creating a nightmare for ourselves. We say, well, during your sports season, you know, we can't do that. There's no possible way that can be implemented.
If it were a full semester, perhaps, but not.
Right, but none of them are, and so how does that work? Yeah. Okay, anything else? Yeah, Mike?
I just, I don't know that I'd like to get up at 5:30 in the morning or to get my kid to a bus stop at 6:15 or 6:30. It's all I can do to get out of bed in the morning to go to work. And I just, I think I'd like to see us concentrating on the middle school and high school without disrupting the elementary school schedule. And that's not possible with any of these choices as they are financially. So I also think that we've got a lot of great ideas for the middle school, high school, which are cool. But for the elementary schools, I just think that we need to look into this more, because I don't feel comfortable with what information that I've read about all of there aren't as many studies about the sleeping patterns for the elementary kids. Don't know the science of that, of the elementary sleep situation yet, so I'm very reticent to want to make a change. We're not just gonna change the high school and middle school. And I don't wanna touch the elementary schools right now.
But we don't know if 9 o'clock is a good time for them. 9 o'clock could be very
We don't
bad.
know. That's,
Right.
we need to figure that out, and I think a week from now is not a good, I'm not gonna
But-
know.
No, but, okay.
Yeah.
And I will also weigh in that I won't be ready to make a decision next week on things that we really don't, excuse me, I'm losing my voice, but that we don't really have. I mean, the idea is interesting and should be looked at, but I'm not ready to make a decision next week to say, yeah, we're going to try to do this different out-of-the-box idea. I'm just not, I share Mike's concern about the elementary school start time. And if we could leave that alone and look at some changes of the high school, middle school, in maybe that system or another. But I just don't think I personally am going to be ready next week to make a decision of this gravity in just a week's time. So I think that we just can't. We can't make a decision that affects every family's position without knowing everything as best we can. And I don't feel that way currently, that we know everything best we can. So I won't be ready next week to make that decision.
So not even ready for the next school year to just, I mean, parents will need time to be able to make a
Absolutely.
decision.
Absolutely.
So maybe that's some of the decision that we would make next week, is to say that if it couldn't happen next year, because we need more time to examine.
Yeah,
Or something like that.
we do need more time, in my opinion, to examine. We're just really, it's kind of like we're just almost starting to, oh, is it 9 or is it 8:30? I mean, I haven't had a proposal that we're kind of rallied behind in the community. Really, we owe the community a longer time period to say this is what our number one or number two things are. So 8:30 is completely off the thing, 8:45 is off the thing. 9 o'clock is currently the piece that we're gonna look at. So I just think that the timetable here between tonight and next Thursday is way too short to make a decision of this magnitude.
Well, remember study sessions ago, I asked us to clear some things off the table, to make it very clear to the community to take things off the table, and the board said no. The board said, no, keep them all on the table. So now here it is weeks later, and you're saying we should have taken those off the table. So I guess I'm now, a little frustrated and confused about, I asked to take things off the table to help have that clear message, and the board told us, the board member said, no, we leave everything on the table for the community, and so that's what we did. But now to hear weeks later, oh no, take things off the table. I can't go back and do that now.
Actually, Madam Chair, the idea was to keep all the items on the table until we had the listening session back in November. From that point on, then some direction I think would have been helpful. So I think there was maybe a communication breakdown somewhere along the line, but.
I don't like the scenarios, any of the scenarios. I'm not gonna vote on any of the scenarios. I just don't like it.
Right, okay. On to 4C. 2017-18 revised
Budget and 2018-19 budget forecast. Dr. Larson?
Members of the board, Jim Nazi is here to share with us information. It's on the screen here and also on the screen in front of you. So I'll turn it over to Joe.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to present the first review of the current year, which is 2017-18 revised budget, included on your board packet. is the same sheet of paper that's up on the screen, and I'm going to have Lynn help me drive here because I just know how much Lynn enjoys budget and finance, so she'll be involved here. So as we know, our fiscal year runs from July to June. So believe it or not, we are pushing up towards halfway through our fiscal year 2017-18. And also, as we know, we are required by statute to approve the preliminary budget by June 30th of each year. The school board did that when they approved the preliminary budget for 2017-18 at their regular meeting on June 8th of 2017. MMKR, our external audit firm, was here last month to present our audited financial results from last fiscal year. And as similar to prior years, we are presenting the revised budget here for the first review, and we'll seek approval at the next meeting on December 14th. Prior to looking at options and scenarios to address our forecast for next year. I should mention that this information that you're seeing tonight was reviewed by our Finance Committee, and they have provided their input on this as well. And before I go over sort of the logistics on the columns and the sections included here, I'll just mention that we are going to see, and as we have seen, there is a structural imbalance that exists in our state between the increases that we're receiving in revenue and how and our increases in expenditures, and you'll see that tonight. Unfortunately, that's an all too common theme in our state when it comes to funding public education, and we are certainly not immune to that structural imbalance that exists, as you will see. So looking at the spreadsheet just logistically, you'll see that our fund balance in the top left-hand corner, our unassigned fund balance to begin the year, as was shared by MMKR last month, was $3,134,000. Okay, that amounts to 8.2% fund balance, which is above our fund balance policy 714, the floor of 8%, but it is creeping close to that number. As we scoot down the line here, looking at some of our restricted categories, you can see first restricted the capital projects levy. That's really the tools for our teachers and staff for their classroom use. So our community was generous and voted to approve a capital projects levy, and you can see the fund balance there to begin the year. Underneath that, you'll see the restricted for health and safety. Now, as you recall, in the 2015 legislative session, health and safety as well as deferred maintenance were rolled into long-term facilities maintenance funding. That's where you can see, or why you can see the $32,000 remaining in the health and safety fund balance, and that will be rolled into LTFM funding. June 30, the last year to run it would be June 30 of 2019. Looking at operating capital, we're starting with $163,000 in operating capital, and we are forecast to run a little bit of a deficit in operating capital, largely due to some coding that we have with some staffing costs that we have coded operating capital. So we'll need to take a look at that, certainly in the preliminary budget for 18-19. And then finally, as we look at the LTFM, and that stands for long-term facilities maintenance revenue, you can see that we're starting the year this year with a slight deficit of $26,000, and we're forecast to have another slight deficit of $21,000. Now, the nice thing that I like about this LTFM funding is it really does give districts local control on their deferred maintenance projects and also some of their health and safety projects. So we are running a little bit of a deficit there, but that is normal and expected. Julie Osterbauer, our facilities coordinator, does a great job with coming up with our 10-year expenditure plan for deferred maintenance. And in some years, we're going to run a little bit of a deficit because we do some larger ticket item projects, and in other years, we'll run a surplus. So that is normal and expected, that deficit in LTFM. Looking underneath that, under the assigned category, you can see that we have assigned fund balances in 4 areas. Our first is an assigned for a subsequent year budget. So we started the year with $547,000 in that assigned fund balance. You'll see as we carry on through the presentation, we are using $500,000 of that total $547,000 for this year's budget. Moving down to the assigned for building donations, that's a assigned area for just what it says, building donations, things like MAIF, our MAIF program, or the MAIF program, and then also just individual building donations flows through there as well. Student activity accounts, underneath that. Those are our activity accounts, really our fundraising accounts. We expect that, and it is to be just really ins and outs. So really what that is things like volleyball or football or other activities that we have run fundraising accounts to sort of supplement the district budgets they receive. So if they buy warm-up jerseys or whatever things activities tend to buy that are over and above the district allocation, that's run through really those fundraising accounts. So that's under the assigned balance as well. And then you can see finally we have a $400,000 assigned balance for severance as well. So the total assigned balance to start the year is $1.465 million. Moving up to the general fund under the unassigned category, you can see our general fund unassigned revenue in the revised budget is $35.717 million. We revised that number to $35.7 million due to an updated student count. Our original or our preliminary budget had an student count forecast at 3,275. We're revising that downwards to 3,240 to reflect actual or close to actual student counts as of recent here. And that's primarily the reason for the decrease in revenue from the preliminary budget to the revised budget, is that drop in student count from projection. Under our revised budget expenditures, we're revising that number to $37.05 million, updated to reflect current expenditures and contractual obligations for the contracts that have settled in the current year, and certainly includes an estimate for teacher negotiations. Our teacher union is currently negotiating, and that amount is subject to change based on the settlement that we will continue negotiating on. You see, as I carry on to the right there, we are budgeted to use $500,000 of the $547,000 in the assigned category for the subsequent year budget. So you can see why there's the inflow in the unassigned and the outflow in the assigned. That's a transfer from the assigned fund balance to the unassigned fund balance. As we've discussed in previous meetings, that amount is certainly helpful to our bottom line this year, but important to note as we have recognized that that's 1 year or one-time use money, and that we would have an estimated $47,000 in that assigned fund balance for a subsequent year budget in subsequent years. So you can see as we get to the end there, our estimated fund balance as of June 30, 2018 is estimated to be just under $2.3 million, and our estimated unassigned fund balance percentage is estimated to be about 5.8%. And so we are forecasting to drop below that 8% threshold, as we've discussed, and it'll be important in coming meetings here that we look at options and scenarios to balance the budget, certainly starting with next year's preliminary budget. So, and we will really begin that conversation or dig into the details of that conversation with the first meeting in January, on January 4th. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, included for review tonight, ahead of the recommendation to approve the revised budget at the next meeting next Thursday, December 14th, and then we will really start the heavy lifting of the preliminary budget for next year after Christmas time.
Questions or comments?
So the number 3240 is our October 1st head count, right?
It is, yeah, two below. It was 3242 as of October 1.
So then, so is there any bump for that 3258 number, or is it minimal?
Great question. So the 3258 is sort of our updated, or our, we've added a few kids since October 1st, which is great. We are funded on an ADM for our pupil units, and ADM stands for Average Daily Membership. And so if a student attends here all year, that ADM, we are paid from the state for 100% of that ADM, which is $6,188 for this year. If a student attends for half the year, then we're paid based on the days that student attends our district. So on average, when you factor in state aid, which is the largest percentage of our revenue, our local levy, and then some categorical aid that we receive, aid and levy that we receive, on average, and students are weighted differently whether they're kindergartners or 11th or 12th graders, but on average, we can factor in about $10,000 or $10,500 in revenue per student. So you can see if we add 5 or 10 kids, that amount can be significant.
So that's what I was just wondering.
Mm-hmm. They would. Now, we've missed some of the year, but certainly, if we continue to see an increase in our student count, if families move in January, or we see some students moving in. Now, typically, we see some students moving out as well. Generally speaking, your October 1st student count is actually going to be higher than your Memorial Day student count, because you have some transitions and things going on through the year. But it certainly is the case that it's important to track our student count, our student accounting, and make sure that that's reported correctly.
So the unassigned fund balance, 5.79 by June 30th of this year, is very concerning.
Our policy is 8%. So I can't remember the policy off the top of my head. Do we have to make cuts before it drops or once it does drop? Do we have to make cuts this year to keep it up at 8? And
It's three things. No new programs are offset. And then try to find strategies to bring the revenue back in. And it's policy number 714.
Right.
And I can't remember the third one is. If you give me a minute, I can find it.
Patrick, can you pull up policy 714?
Yep.
Patrick's got it. So does that mean with this projected fund balance that we won't be adding any new programs this year, mid-year, any point in the year because of the policy and what we see on the horizon?
Yes.
Okay.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
One of the, and as you'll see in the policy, one of the parameters or requirements of the fund balance policy is if your fund balance falls below that 8% threshold, no increases to things like supplies, equipment expenditures, and the budget that you see here does not show an increase from the preliminary budget in those areas. So,
So if there were to be requests from a building or units asking for more, the answer is just no, because of the fund balance policy. Right, right. So is that being communicated out to buildings then, as this,
Once the board approves
the revised budget next week? Okay. There it is. So allocations such as textbook supplies shall be frozen, is that all the funds
That's
frozen?
budget.
Or the budget amount is frozen?
I interpreted, or we interpreted as the budgeted amount. That is a good question. I hadn't thought about it that way.
Yeah. When I think of freeze, I think
Quick freeze, it's done. You know, but I think we just need to be clear, if that's the way administration is interpreting it, as long as that's clear to building principals and, staff.
Everything is already ordered and
Right.
summarized.
Right.
It's pretty
Almost,
simple.
yeah, almost everything. Sometimes we'll get it on like another student in, and then we have
Right.
to get the textbook or whatever it might be.
Right.
So.
So most of that money is already spent anyway.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry, Kevin? Thank you.
I really am losing my voice, I'm sorry. When did we kind of know we were, we've had indications over the last year or so that we're coming to a fiscal cliff. How soon after you came on board did you realize that things were tough on the financial side? I think I saw you pulling your hair out on the second day. No, I'm kidding, but.
What'd you do, Bill?
When did you know that there was this looming?
I've heard referred to as the perfect storm, and I realize that is quite drastic. Certainly, we can get through this. The hard truth about the business of doing public education in Minnesota as it sits right now is there is a structural imbalance. As I look at our revenue and our expenditures, on average, or 2% new money from the state for us is between $400,000 and $450,000. Now, that's paid on student count, and that's assuming the same student count, right? 2% new money is $400,000. On average, our expenditures go up by about $550,000 each year. So there's an imbalance there of 150,000. That combined with our student count is down from 2 years ago, when we had a balanced budget at 3,289 students. Now we're at 3,240. So when increases in state aid don't keep pace with inflation, and we are down students, that creates a difficult financial situation.
But there's no possible way to win at the game, because if you continually add students, you're gonna run out of space, you're gonna overcrowd classrooms, we can't win.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, the adding student solution works for
A little bit.
I agree. It's not sustainable.
It's not sustainable,
Mhm.
yeah.
Okay, so,
Oh.
excuse me, follow-up question. We've had in the past times when I think we've added staff, we've set kind of where we want to be, and then we maybe add some staff. And so are we being cautious in the adding of staff piece? Have we done that since the beginning of the year? Because I think we knew this pretty quickly. Do we have a hiring freeze saying no new staff? Or are we still bringing some folks in a little bit?
In terms of special education, we have added.
Okay. Because that's a statute thing. We have to do that, right?
But I think the board's been very aware too, and we went over every staff and very carefully at the beginning of the year to make sure we were not adding staff because we knew it was coming. So I think the board's being mindful also. I mean, the administration is mindful, and we're, I don't want to say watching closely or double checking, but I mean, that's our role and responsibility is to watch that. I think we have been.
But I'm just wondering if all of that flows through Bill, who's charged with doing this for us, if you're being aware of some of this stuff so that, again, it helps you. I mean, I don't know, so I'm just asking the questions, whether you are informed of some of this.
You're asking a process question of what happens outside of the board meeting.
Yep.
Staff member would need to be hired, how is it handled?
Yes.
On our
Can you talk through the process?
Tuesday cabinet meeting, executive team meeting, if there's additional hiring, we'll discuss them there. So then, Beth, Bill,
Mhm.
and Nicole, Pleasant, White Patrick, get there.
Okay.
And I was looking at, any postings, it's usually to replace,
Mhm.
like a teacher, if it's, a teacher's going on maternity leave or leave for some reason,
Mhm.
then that would be the reason we bring in somebody in to replace that person, not to add to our staff.
So the FTEs are staying stable, except in special ed, due to statute language and services for students.
Yeah, if there's needs, if there's a student need in special education.
Right.
And we
Mhm.
can't meet that need, then we do
Right.
have to hire a staff person to help with that.
Right. And then that staff hiring goes through the administrative team that Dr. Larson takes it there, and so everyone's aware of the process.
So
Does that
since
answer
the
the
beginning of
question?
the school year, there were no new hires.
At the beginning.
Since the beginning of the school year.
Since the beginning of the school year, we've been a replacement hires.
Right.
for new
Mhm.
people.
Right.
With one exception, we did have 70-plus students at OH Anderson that required speech and language services. So we did add an additional .2 in order to cover that.
And the kindergarten teacher at the very beginning of the year, as you remember, we had a increase in classes there.
And
That
all-
was a new position.
Right. And so all the positions, remember, come through the consent agenda, so we see them as they come through. And if you have questions on hiring, that, according to board operating policy, should be a call to Dr. Larson prior to the board meeting to ask that either be expanded upon during the board meeting or answered in board notes.
And you may see, like, there's an LSN posting out there to replace somebody that wants to have less time. So those are the kind of things that would be out there
Right.
in postings that you use.
Do we more than answer that question, Kevin?
So, and I did ask Bill if the whole board could have a report last week. So, I mean, this is going to take a while probably for us to have a rundown of FTEs and in proportion to the number of students for the last few years. So we could all see that as part of our conversation.
Do you know what you mean? I don't know what that.
We talked about it at our, we talked about it at the, At the budget meeting that we had last week.
Question, so our budget was built on 3275, and I don't know who this question's for, but, so we went through a series of votes on open enrollment. Did those votes get us to 3275?
Yes and no. Some of the no was that, there were a few kids, siblings at O.H. Anderson that were no. There were some other kids that were yes, and then they said no to us. And then there were, the later you wait in the summer, the worse it is.
I understand.
And so we need to move quickly.
So when
But
they
the
said
other
no
piece
to
was-
us,
well,
oh,
But the other piece was we lost students. We lost enrolled students who chose to leave the district that we were not expecting.
Okay.
They weren't move-outs, they were.
and how many? That, I would like to know those numbers, because I think that would help us.
And I think those came through board notes in September, October.
Okay.
Dr. Washington shared with us numbers of students by grade level even of who left.
And is that when we asked for if we could start doing exit interviews?
I believe so.
Because I think, obviously, if we're building a budget off of numbers and it didn't work, we need to learn why it didn't work so we don't repeat this. And I understand there are so many factors, and part of this is a guessing game. We don't know who will move into the district, or who will move out. But knowing all of that information we can know will help us make the best decisions.
So we have a model that we're using for open enrollment, and it's a model, and I've never seen it work perfectly.
I
So one year we had
understand.
lots of move-ins, and we had large class sizes.
But
And the next
one-
year, we didn't get enough students, and we're short,
Right. But,
Doing well.
but given, even with that model, there's still more we could learn. We could learn why all those students left. Was it for sports? Was it for this? And I know we discussed having exit interviews, and I think especially given the situation we're in right now, it needs to be followed through. It needs to happen.
We're actually creating a survey right now. Mike Newbuck is creating a survey with Patrick on an exit survey to make it easy for families to, or kids to say, okay, they're leaving, this is why, and, to look at, are there some things that we could change? Or, or
Right,
is it
right.
or are they leaving for a reason that, we
Offer,
aren't? Yes,
right.
we can offer that. But that's to help us with building and seeing what kind of programming that we need in place.
Thank you. I think that will help inform what number our budget should be set on in the future. If we know kids are leaving for a certain reason and we know we're not going to be offering it and not, able to meet that need, we'll know to lower our number for the next budget. Or we'll raise it if we know it's a need we'll be able to meet. So, thank you.
And do we know when our next personnel meeting is that we will be diving into this subject? Because I would think that would need to happen soon, where we were going to have the personnel committee be
Take that issue
open
on.
enrollment
Yep.
issue committee.
I believe it's January 4th, I'm not even.
I think.
It is, okay.
Other questions on the budget financial situation? Thank you for sharing that news.
Thank you.
All right, next item on the agenda is to close the meeting, to have a discussion on labor negotiation strategies in closed session pertinent to Minnesota Statute 13D.03, teacher contract negotiations. So members of the audience, thank you for coming tonight. The board will take a 2 or 3 minute recess, so if board members want to get up and stretch, get a drink of water, whatever, we'll start when the room is cleared.
Greg or Patrick?